Hello, everyone. This is going to be a bit of a hodgepodge of two different blog posts that I made on my website, sheddingoftheego.com. Please check it out. Link will be in the description box. I want to talk today, gentlemen, about bachelors and fathers. Okay? We're going to start with a bit about a Republican senator named Mark Kirk, who recently found himself in hot water when he poked fun at Senate colleague Lindsey Graham under the mistaken assumption that his microphone was not muted. His microphone was hot. And so he was talking unaware of that. And Graham, having aspirations for the United States presidency, I believe he announced his candidacy already. If he's elected, he's going to be one of a group of only two other presidents who are bachelors. That's James Buchanan and Grover Cleveland, being the two unspoken fors. Unfortunately, Americans demonstrate a clear pattern for electing presidents that have, at the very least, a significant other. Given that there have only been male presidents, this means that Americans have strong reservations about electing a man sans a first lady in tow. And these were Kirk's exact words on the matter. He said, quote, "I've been joking with Lindsey because he doesn't have a, did you see that? And then he got interrupted and he said, he's going to have a rotating first lady. He's a bro with no hoe." He was referencing Graham's own controversial statements. As some of you already know, Graham, when asked about his bachelor status and how it could affect his presidency, said the following. He said, quote, "Well, I've got a sister. She could play that role if necessary," the 59-year-old South Carolinian president hopeful told the Daily Mail Online in an interview published Tuesday. He said, "I've got a lot of friends. We'll have a rotating first lady," end quote. Now, this shouldn't even be an issue. It should be completely irrelevant whether or not someone contending for the presidency of the most powerful nation in the world has decided to tie the knot, and yet it is an issue. It is relevant. The demographics do not lie. But why? Why is it relevant? Well, this phenomenon isn't limited to the U.S. To my knowledge, there have only been 4 bachelor prime ministers in the U.K. as well. They are as follows: the Earl of Wilmington, William Pitt the Younger, Arthur Balfour, and Edward Heath. The most recent of which was Edward Heath, which I just mentioned, and he was his time of office was 1970 to 1974. And I'm more than willing to bet that if you look throughout Western civilization and the leaders of Western civilization, you're going to see that this is a phenomenon not of the U.S., not of the U.K., but of Western civilization. Bachelor men are treated at best with suspicion and at worst with open discrimination. What society doesn't want you to know is that a bachelor is dangerous to society. He is free from the burdens of propping up a family, and thus he is free from providing a set amount of his income to the state because the missus will not be there to buy copious amounts of useless junk, paving the way for Bed Bath & Beyond to line the pockets of Uncle Sam with more tax revenue. For this, society finds methods, usually via cultural enforcement or hidden bachelor taxes, that allow for economic and social discrimination against bachelors that exist in every level of society. If you want to start a business, you must pay as a bachelor for somebody else's familial healthcare benefit that you won't get. And we're going to be talking about this in this video. I'm going to try to, in this video, bring up 2 contradictory statements or stances that I think the men's movement or MGTOW or MRAs or whatever can adopt. One of the stances is going to be that bachelors should have the right to demand that society stops discriminating against them, stops subsidizing, the female collective, and if men want to get married, they shouldn't have any access to any kind of benefits that bachelors do. Another stance that I'm going to advocate for is that men should perhaps, lobby the government to pursue things like paternity leave. And these are 2 contradicting statements, and I'm going to admit it right here, right now, in the beginning of this video, to save confusion in the comment section. Yes, these 2 points are contradictory. I'm putting it out there and seeing what happens, and let the best idea win. But again, if you want to start a business, you have to pay as a bachelor for somebody else's familial healthcare benefit that you won't get. If you want to go the surrogate route in terms of reproduction so that you have no obligations towards women after you terminate parental rights of the woman who played the part of the surrogate, then you're looked at with discrimination. There's going to be a link to that in the description box. There have been instances of single men that have been told to move off of airplane seats because they were sitting too close to children. Single men are not trusted. And that is because the presumption of motherhood states that women are the, quote, natural caregivers of children, despite evidence that suggests that women are more violent toward children than men are. I believe that our civilization, I've said this before many times, is a reflection of the drives of our species. I've said it before, that modern courtship, things like traditionalism and even feminism, can both be understood through the visual model of placing a water wheel in the stream of human reproduction in hopes of generating energy and thus generating work. The bit that our civilization is uneasy about is the female contribution towards this entire process. We know that for the most part, men keep civilization running. Every bridge builder, every sewage and waste management operator, every engineer keeping our 4G satellites in geosynchronous orbit will almost always be male. I read somewhere that without supervision, most nuclear power plants would start to malfunction and shut down after 30 hours. I don't know how valid that statement is, but I would assume that, these power plants must be staffed at all times by very well-trained and very skilled people and would eventually fall into potentially catastrophic disrepair without proper maintenance. How many of these maintenance technicians are men? But you see, in terms of the female contribution to civilization, women, many of you know this already for the most part. This is a generalization, and yes, there are competent female scientists. There are competent female inventors. I wish we had more. So this isn't trying to disparage them. But women are, from our civilization, despite the presence of some female innovators and inventors, only expected to bear children. They can work if they'd like, but they can also coast through life as broodmares dispensing babies and sex and still be considered an accomplished citizen in civilization. These, gentlemen, are the paltry expectations we have of half the human race. This is the end result of structuring civilization around the acquisition of pussy. Whenever I make this point about men inventing, men building, men running civilization and maintaining it, I'm inevitably confronted with the, well, you didn't do that fallacy, right? The argument that because I was not in, Pasteur's lab boiling milk with him, that I cannot lay claim to some communal credit encompassing all of maledom for his discoveries. This is equivalent of saying that, for example, the human species can't take credit for spaceflight because only certain individuals developed the science to accomplish it. Such an argument does not stand up to scrutiny. We don't say that beavers are not responsible for damming up rivers and streams because all beavers didn't take part in it. Most beavers do. And if mostly men have invented or built civilization, it is acceptable and not wrong in the slightest to credit them for it. And again, this is cross-cultural. Every time you see civilization, the Aztecs, and the Mayans, the Spaniards, the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians, every single time you're going to discover, cross-culturally speaking, that the vast amount of innovators are men. But fine, whatever. Let's entertain this flawed line of logic for a bit, that it's not acceptable for individual men to talk about the achievements of men and lay some kind of claim to that. Okay, fine. Perhaps you remember the 2015 Oscars, where an actress named Patricia Arquette stood up on stage and said the following in her award acceptance speech. She said, quote, "To every woman who gave birth to every taxpayer and citizen of this nation, we have fought for everybody else's equal rights. It is our time to have wage equality once and for all and equal rights for women in the United States of America." And a video of that is going to be in the description box. I would put it in the video, but I don't want to obviously incur a copyright claim, so there's going to be a link to it. So, like men, women are just as prone, it seems, to take credit for the achievements of their collective wombs, even if they didn't have children, even if they're infertile, etc. Right? But you see, Patricia Arquette, women like you, every time men talk about their collective achievements, tell men that they didn't hunt the mammoth themselves. Our Neolithic ancestors did it. They were just individuals who happened to be men. Since, of course, individual men are not allowed to take credit for male endeavors, the women Patricia Arquette speaks of don't deserve equal pay, given that all these women that gave birth to every taxpayer in America were just individuals too, who happen to have gone through pregnancy, right? Every drafted soldier that has protected ingrates like Arquette and women like her for thousands of years was a man. Well, I should correct myself there, actually. They were either men or boys, since grown women would rather see child soldiers fight and die than to put the golden uterus on the front lines alongside men. So I guess that makes us even. But on top of this, I find it incredible that when women engage in these little biological bragging sessions, waxing nostalgic on the incredible, according to them, feat of pushing children out of their birth canals, they neglect to mention that without the sperm of men, none of this could ever or would ever happen. And without the actions of men in their mass agriculture and cesarean sections and vaccinations and all that, women could not give birth in the sheer numbers they do in Western civilization. It simply would not be possible. Not only are men half the reproductive process in the biological sense, but they have a repeated track record of making pregnancy easier and safer for women. Now, no one calls this hypocrisy out for what it is, because no one wishes to incur the social burdens that come along with criticizing women. And it is because of this that society develops more and more sophisticated methods by which they can avoid speaking this truth aloud. Motherhood becomes the, quote, hardest job in the world. But the preponderance of men in the most labor-intensive and technically demanding fields becomes taking unearned credit for hunting the mammoth, at least when it's being pointed out by those that have penises. While at the same time, women somehow share in the victimization of every woman that died in some back alley abortion before Roe v. Wade. Men's contributions are minimized or disassociated with men altogether, while women's contributions are exalted and inextricable from the holy vagina. Society, and civilization in its current sense, operates off of the appeasement of women. At least subconsciously it does. Thus, it is no wonder that a bachelor seeking the highest political office in the land is met with scrutiny and suspicion. Any politician, either on the feminist left or the gynocentric right, must pay the piper some way or another. He must be willing to demonstrate his ability to dedicate vast amounts of his time, whether it be political or personal, to womankind. And again, this is the case whether it's through politicized feminism or via a token, quote, first lady. In having a, quote, first lady on his arm, what a president candidate really does is to demonstrate his willingness to put ladies first. And thus, Graham, even if he was popular as a presidential candidate, he will not win and cannot win the presidential nomination. No man who doesn't have a woman to show America his good old-fashioned red-blooded American family will. These prevailing attitudes are not simply limited to single men. Bachelors are simply at the forefront of society's suspicion of errant males. Fatherhood is simply a step up on the totem pole, but it too must also take a backseat to the presumption of motherhood. Now, I'm going to read to you a Reddit post I found. This is a Reddit post from the subreddit, the parenting subreddit. And this is a gentleman posting with a throwaway account. And I'm going to read to you, this is a man who is a father of 2 young boys, and he is being alienated by his mother, by his wife, the mother of his children. And I'm going to read to you the post, and you're going to see exactly how she's doing it here. It says, quote, "Hey, parenting Reddit, this is a throwaway account here. Sorry this is long, I have a lot on my chest. I'm a dad, age 32, of 2 amazing boys, one aged 3 and one aged 1. They are my everything, the apple of my eye. These boys and I are extremely fortunate to have an amazing woman in our lives in the form of their mother, who is 32, as well as my wife and high school sweetheart. She gives the boys an amazing environment, and they are thriving because of it. As for myself, I am the breadwinner in the family, as we've chosen to have my wife stay home with the kids. My wife is a well-educated woman and wants nothing but the best for the boys. While she is very tired from time to time, what mom isn't, he says in parentheses, she does all of these amazing things for our boys with such grace and ease. It's downright admirable in my eyes, he says. And we're going to stop there, and we're going to continue later. I just want to comment on this little paragraph first here. What I want you to do is pay attention to the mental gymnastics being jumped here. This entire paragraph seems to be kind of subtly apologizing for his wife's laziness. Right off the bat, he's letting us know how fortunate he is to have such an amazing woman, and that he is the breadwinner workhorse that is making the entire situation possible through his labor. And look how he says that. He says, quote, as for myself, right, when he describes his role in the relationship, he is just a glorified ATM machine. And so gone is the rosy, colorful language he used to introduce us to the missus, right, when he talks about himself. And then he informs us that, quote, we have, end quote, chosen to have his wife stay at home, where she doles out some magnificent motherhood with, quote, grace and ease. And he says the entire spectacle is downright admirable. How amazing. This is a very common tactic, gentlemen, that men caught in the yoke of the protector-provider relationship involving state contracts, that is, marriage and kids, engage in order to quell the feelings of hopelessness that must accompany the slow, creeping realization that they are going to be bill payers for the rest of their lives. Men love, they absolutely love to do this. They love to overstate the contributions of women and downplay their own. It helps them deal with their diminished role in regards to parenthood, amongst other things. This man knows that, quote, they didn't decide to have the mother stay home and raise the kids while he works. What really happened is that the mother would not allow him to have access to the children. She would have divorced him a long time ago if he was not paying the bills. His rationalizations are coping mechanisms for the fact that society and the mother of his children have, for all intents and purposes, dismissed him as having any meaningful role to contribute to the upbringing of his own children other than his gametes and his paychecks. Women and society naturally default to the presumption of motherhood. Or should I say, the presumption of the superiority of motherhood. There's nothing technically wrong with motherhood, but women and society default to presume it is superior than fatherhood. When in fact, any trip into a community or, a ghetto populated solely by single mothers and their fatherless offspring will show you immediately which half of the parenthood equation is truly essential for the rearing of healthy, happy, and productive offspring. So, we're going back to the Reddit post here, and he says, quote, "So we have amazing boys. What could be the problem? Simply put, I'm often left feeling like I'm not, quote, playing by the rules, with increased frequency over the last 3 years, especially after the addition of number 2, as number 1 ages." He's talking about his boys here, the younger and older one. He says, "I've been left feeling like I'm an assistant coach, almost like she's passively and sometimes kindly saying, quote, I've gotten us here, don't mess this up, end quote. Like they are her children, and I'm just here to help her. Sometimes she is just trying to provide me with a solution that has helped her in the past, and for this I am appreciative and show gratitude," end quote. Now we're going to stop there again. They are her children. I don't know, he probably doesn't know this yet. They are her children. They're not his children, they are her children. They belong to her in the state, and the entitled attitude that she displays is indicative of that. This man could simply demand that his style of parenting be viewed as just as valid, and he could begin implementing this with his kids, but his dear wife isn't going to like that very much, and it would only be a matter of time before she revoked his fatherhood privileges by having the state kick him out of his children's lives via divorce. That's what stay-at-home wives, the covert gynocentrists that they are, understand that men who bust their humps to protect them usually don't. Now let's go back. He says, quote, "All too often, I'm being corrected and reminded on how I could have handled something better. Most often, this comes during a time when the older one, who's too smart for his own good, is having a hard time. I do my best to handle the situation the way I feel is best, but in the end, I'm left looking like a teen trying to take a girl's bra off for the first time. It also doesn't just have to be during my son's mini battles. Sometimes I'm reminded on how I should play with them, quote, better. Perhaps an activity isn't, quote, age appropriate. Friggin' A, we're laughing and having a good, safe time. I'm a little better with the younger one, and he's an easy baby, and I'm repeating a lot of these things I was, quote, conditioned to do with the bigger one. It's important to know that I'm in no way physical with the kids. That's not her reason for correcting me. I also consider myself a good dad. I'm not a deadbeat, and I like to reward myself by thinking many, many children would be fortunate to have a father like myself. Am I the only one that can just picture this selfish woman standing over her children's father, watching him play with his children, and then scolding him for trying to impart some masculine lesson on his boys, with her only having to give a look of disapproval to indicate that he has done something wrong? Probably later she'll tell him about what he did and how it wasn't, age appropriate for his boys. And a few years down the road, when the boys are in school and some female guidance counselor wants to put one of these boys on ADHD medication, then she's not going to tell her that that isn't age appropriate. She will acquiesce, turning her son into a zombie, because the guidance counselor, an emissary of the state, knows better than his own father what is appropriate for his boys. He continues and says, "One of the things that gets me the most is that I feel undermined in the eyes of my sons. A father should never feel inadequate to the two humans in his life that look up to him the most to guide them, to protect them, and to be their best friend. A boo-boo happens, I'm consoling. Mom swoops in to take over. Is this natural maternal instinct? Yes, but I don't want my boys to only be consoled by one person, and I've never been given the chance to give them that safe feeling. I also feel that if this keeps up, my, quote, authority, it's in quotes because I can't think of a better word, will soon diminish, and the boys will seek the mother when I'm asking them to do something or reprimanding them. By my nature, I'm a fixer, and I've never felt so broken about something so important to me. Pay very close attention to that one last part, gentlemen. We're going to get back to that in a second, because it's a subtle form of parental alienation, and we're going to talk about that later. Now, truly, I feel bad for this guy. You know, he seems to understand that fathers are important, and that fathers can in fact console their boys, but he defaults to the religion of mother worship. He accepts as a matter of fact the superiority of her, quote, mothering instinct, when she monopolizes the dispensation of comfort when their children need comfort the most. He doesn't know it yet, but these types of women who, for all we know, have not a feminist bone in their bodies, these are the type of women that will turn into the most vile, misandrous creatures one can imagine once you guys get to divorce court. She is entitled, after all, to her children. Remember, not his children, her children. Then he says, quote, I've almost reached the point where I'm going to stop trying. Just become a bump on a pickle. Let her be the puppeteer. I've told her this. I've let my wife know on countless occasions after almost each occurrence how this makes me feel. To which she responds with, quote, I'm sorry, it's just that what you were doing isn't right. Or, quote, don't say you're always wrong. Just yesterday you did, and he inserts something minor or something I was coached to do by her, end quote. I get that she may understand things a little better as she's with them 24/7. This is becoming heavy for me. She is not a bad person. Yes, she is. He just won't admit it to himself. She is not a bad person. I love her to death. I just need help making her realize the situation, end quote. So, gentlemen, this is what the brainwashed provider male is known for, rationalizing his own exploitation. You see, one of the core issues that I have with the traditional male gender role is the separation of men from their children in the initial stages of a child's development. Adherence to this archaic definition of masculinity necessitates that at key stages in a child's development, a father must be away, cooped up somewhere in some cubicle or whatever environment he works in, while his child's brain is literally neurologically wiring itself and forming a conceptualization of the world for the first time in its life. Now, I want to ask you, what do you think a young boy who almost never sees his dad other than to watch him mosey on in, tired out of his mind from a daunting day at work, what do you think he builds as a conceptualization of his father? He sees his nurturing mother who feeds him, who gives him affection and caring, and then he comes, the father, the intruder. The boy is alienated from the start from his father with this dynamic who, again, his father, remember, provides him with the type of support that he is least likely to understand or be cognizant of or appreciate, and that is financial support. Because what does a boy know of the hard-earned heat and food and electricity that his father supplies him with? According to his perspective, these things are already provided, not by his father, but by the home he lives in. He knows not that the home has to be purchased and maintained and mortgaged or rented by his father's labor. He simply knows that when he flicks a light switch, the home illuminates his surroundings, or that when he turns a faucet on, the home dispenses hot water. His father's contributions are silent, and thus they are unappreciated. His mother, on the other hand, dispenses her affection in a much more tangible and visceral way. She touches him, she kisses him, she puts his Band-Aid on when he scrapes his skin. She is maternal and caring, and to a young boy, very likely ethereal looking. She probably appears almost ethereal to him. Except for one instance. There's only one real instance where the boy witnesses, unless she's like an abuser, where the boy witnesses unpleasantness coming from his mother. And that is when the boy has misbehaved in a way that the mother then needs extra help, because he's misbehaved so badly that she needs extra help from the, quote, intruder, right? From the father in order to discipline him. And so she tells him, well, wait until your father gets home. He's going to straighten you out. And she says that threateningly, of course. And these words alone are enough to strike fear and terror into the heart of a young boy. It is his first introduction to the concept of female proxy violence. It's his mother appealing to a man the boy cannot possibly challenge physically, his father. So what lasting psychological implications do you think that this has for young boys? To see his father, whom he sees so rarely, right, while he's out securing resources that the boy can't appreciate. And then to see the mother use this tactic of proxy violence to terrorize him with the threat of his father's angry presence, right? We often hear about parental alienation after divorce. But if you ask me, the traditionalist provider gender role has nestled into it a default setting of parental alienation of the fathers from their children already. Razorblade Candy has talked about this at length, actually. And all of this has the added benefit of a form of self-perpetuating gynocentrism, in that at the point of divorce, there has already been a precedent established that the children are more comfortable with the mother, and that to rescind them to the father's custody would destabilize the children much more than it would to allow the children to stay with their mother. So with all of that said, gentlemen, it is with great interest that I watch what seems to be more and more men agitating for more time with their children. And I'm going to go through a couple of links here, and it's going to be lengthy, but I have to read them to you here. This is an article titled, "Want More Involved Dads? Give Them More Time Off Early." And this article details what happened when men in Iceland were given the same amount of parental leave as women. It says, quote, "Paid parental leave is a luxury in the United States. We are one of the 3 advanced and not so advanced countries in the world without it. Only 11% of all workers get it, and few of them are fathers. Dads, if they're lucky, may get 1 day to a week or 2 at most," one recent study found. That sets up the dynamic that mom becomes the primary caregiver, not just at the start, but like forever. American moms on average do double the housework and child care of their spouses, even when they work full time. So what happens when you give dads more time? Take a look at what happened in Iceland. In 2000, Iceland, pushed mainly by dads who wanted more time with their babies, sought to break the pattern that leads to traditional gender roles. Lawmakers changed their paid parental leave policy and began requiring dads to take a portion or the whole family would lose the time, a so-called use it or lose it policy that other Nordic countries had already adopted in the 1990s. Before that, families in Iceland were supposed to share a 6-month paid leave, but most often, mothers took all of it, and 3 years later had most of the caregiving responsibilities. The point of change, according to the legislation, was to, quote, "ensure that children enjoy the care of both parents." The second aim of the law is to enable both men and women to coordinate family life and work outside of the home, end quote. And then the article says, and that's exactly what happens, according to a new study of more than 5,000 parents in Iceland. Now, about 90% of all fathers in Iceland take paid parental leave, significantly more than before the, quote, "daddy days" policy. Before the policy, about 34% of all parents shared care equally when their firstborn child turned 3. After the policy, nearly 60% did. The charts here show, and you can see that on the link, by the way, the charts here show data on cohabitating parents only, and the percentage sharing care was even higher at 70%. So essentially, gentlemen, what this article is saying is that fathers can and will, if given the opportunity, take time off of work in order to take part in their children's lives. And what this says is that fathers do, in fact, value their time with their offspring and do not prefer to be out there working instead because the male gender role tells them to. They want to spend time with their children. They don't because they are pressured into being the breadwinner. And another article is going to back this up here. This is an article from CNN titled, "Survey, Working Dads Want More Family Time." And this article gives the following statistics compiled by a survey by the job search engine CareerBuilder.com. It says, quote, "According to a new CareerBuilder.com survey, 37% of working dads say they'd leave their jobs if their spouse or partner made enough money to support the family. If given the choice, another 38% would take a pay cut to spend more time with their kids. Nearly 1 in 4, that's 24%, of working dads feel work is negatively impacting their relationship with their children. 48% have missed a significant event in their child's life due to work at least once in the last year, and nearly 1 in 5, that's 18%, have missed 4 or more. According to the survey, the time working dads spend on work far exceeds the time spent with their children. More than 1 in 4, that's 27% of working dads, say they spend more than 50 hours a week on work, and nearly 1 in 10, that's 8%, spend more than 60 hours. In terms of the time they spend with their children, 1 in 4, that's 25%, Working dads spend less than 1 hour with their kids each day. 42% spend less than 2 hours each day. So then, gentlemen, is it any wonder that women are awarded custody more than men? The problem here is multifaceted, gentlemen. I know that many of you want some neat, easy answer. I know that a lot of you want somebody to just tell you, well, if we just shrink the government, it's all going to be okay. No, that's not the case, right? That could help, but the problems we face here are as much social problems as they are political. In fact, it is very likely that political change cannot proceed without social change first. If fathers want to stop getting screwed in the divorce courts, then they'd better start acting like they're more than walking wallets to their children. They better stop embracing this traditionalist nonsense that says that they have to be in the workplace at the most formative period in their children's lives. Men have to be visibly seen saying that they reject this traditional provider role and that they want to spend as much time as women do at home with the kids, or at the very least much more time than they currently are in comparison to women. And they have to appeal to social as well as governmental institutions to do that. Because guess what, gentlemen? I want you to listen to this. If they don't, nobody's going to give a shit. Unless you air your grievances out there, nobody's going to give a shit if you suffer. And it takes just one look at the current state of homelessness and the fact that most of these homeless have penises to show you that society will happily allow men to continue to function as ATM machines for women and their children. They will let men starve on the streets. Do you think that they won't let you work yourselves into self-inflicted parental alienation? And yes, it is true, men are starting out here with a bit of a biological handicap. Yes, there is an empathy gap, and nobody is denying this. But this doesn't mean that it's impossible to focus on a certain issue that can benefit men and slowly but surely change the social narrative on that issue. It's not impossible, gentlemen. And this Iceland article actually proves that. Take a look at, gay people, gay folks, for example. Like all species, we exist to reproduce. So what are the chances, then, gentlemen, that we've evolved some sort of innate compassion reflex towards homosexuals, who are statistically much less likely to reproduce? I mean, it's probably pretty low. It's very possible that our species has a natural compassion gap for the issues that gay people face. And yet, we are at a point now, especially here in America and in the West, where gay folks have been able to frame their issues in such a way that has caused more and more people to accept their struggle as valid. When gay folks are victimized, they rally together and make sure that people know that they have been victimized and that there will be political and social consequences as a result of them being victimized. They practice identity politics. Yes, gentlemen, I said identity politics. And I know this is a dirty word, mainly because in the manosphere we've brainwashed ourselves into thinking that this is some kind of evil, horrible thing. But I use the term identity politics simply to describe the following. I am a man, thus I identify as a man. And I believe that men should act in the interests of men, politically and socially speaking. And sometimes, sure, that means limiting government, which I'm all for when it's appropriate and if it's in the interest of men. Sometimes this also means demanding paternity leave, when appropriate and if it's also in the interest of men. And it also means attempting to compel these social institutions around us to empathize with us when we are genuinely victimized. You see, it is a form of self-censorship when we refuse to acknowledge when we are genuinely victimized, simply because social justice warriors feel victimized by everything and anything that happens to them. Only a fool would not complain about his broken leg because he's surrounded by spoiled hipsters claiming to be victimized because their lattes aren't made right. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, gentlemen. If you allow the wheel bearing the most pressure on the pulley system to continue to go ungreased just because it doesn't make any noise, it's going to eventually break. And in a way, this is our fault, of course, because you see, men think themselves too good or too masculine or macho to claim that they're victims. Because that's pussy shit. That's commie shit. That's leftist shit, right? I sincerely believe that if we ever figure out a way to bring the dead back to life, murdered men would rise up from the dead and refuse to admit they were victims of murder. I remember talking with Man Woman Myth on Skype. I'll never forget this. And he once told me that if the penalty for men in divorce was having to be summarily decapitated, he believed that men would still get married and accept the penalty upon divorce. Anyway, Here's another article, gentlemen, and this is going to be the last one here. This article is titled, How Some Men Fake an 80-Hour Work Week and Why It Matters. And this article shows the lengths some men are willing to go to spend time with their children. It starts by saying, quote, imagine an elite professional services firm with a high-performing workaholic culture. Everyone is expected to turn on a dime to serve a client, travel at a moment's notice, and be available pretty much every evening and weekend. It can make for a grueling work life, but at the highest levels of accounting law, investment banking, and consulting firms, it is just the way things are. Except for one dirty little secret. Some of the people ostensibly turning in those 80 and 90-hour work weeks, particularly men, may just be faking it. Many of them were, at least at one elite consulting firm studied by Erin Reed, a professor at Boston University's Questrom School of Business. It's impossible to know if what she learned at the unidentified consulting firm applies across the world of work more broadly, but her research, published in the academic journal Organization Science, offers a way to understand how the professional world differs between men and women, and some of the ways a hard-charging culture that emphasizes long hours above all can make some companies worse off. Mrs. Reed interviewed more than 100 people in the American offices of a global consulting firm and had access to performance reviews and internal human resource documents. At the firm, there was a strong culture around long hours and responding to clients promptly. She said, quote, when the clients need me to be somewhere, I just have to be there, said one of the consultants Mrs. Reed interviewed. And if you can't be there, it's probably because you've got another client meeting at the same time. You know, it's tough to say I can't be there because my son had a Cub Scout meeting, end quote. Then she said some people fully embraced this culture and put in the long hours, and they tended to be the top performers. Others openly pushed back against it, insisting upon lighter and more flexible work hours or less travel. They were punished in their performance reviews. The third group is the most interesting. Some 31% of the men and 11% of the women whose records Mrs. Reed examined managed to achieve the benefits of a more moderate work schedule without explicitly asking for it. They made an effort to line up clients who were local, reducing the need for travel. When they skipped work to spend time with their children or spouse, they didn't call attention to it. One team on which several members had small children agreed to, among themselves, to cover for one or another so that everyone could have more flexible hours. A male junior manager described working to have repeat consulting engagements with a company near enough to his home that he could take care of it with day trips. I try to head out by 5 and get home at 5:30 and have dinner and play with my daughter, he said, adding that he generally kept weekend work down to 2 hours of catching up on email. Despite the limited hours, he said, I know what clients are expecting, so I deliver above that. He received a high performance review and promotion. And then it says, finally, what is fascinating about the firm Mrs. Reed studied is that these people who, in her terminology, were passing as workaholics received performance reviews that were as strong as their hyper-ambitious colleagues. For people who were good at faking it, there was no real damage done with their lighter workloads, end quote. So, we're going to stop there, and I'm just going to leave you with this. Men, it seems, do like to spend time with their children, and are willing to lie to their bosses in order to do it. But they can't organize politically and socially to demand change. Think about that. More on this later, gentlemen. Thanks for listening.